The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Program, or WSFR, provides a reliable funding source for state fish and game agencies to get their work done. Manufacturers and importers of hunting and fishing gear pay an excise tax to the federal government. That tax is passed on to hunters and anglers in the price paid for hunting and fishing gear at the cash register. That tax, held in trust by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's WSFR program, is given to state agencies such as the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. The money must be used on projects that benefit fish and wildlife, boating access, or research and education. This partnership between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and state game and fish agencies has provided beneficial conservation since 1937. The work of the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish on Rio Grande cutthroat trout stands as an example of the WSFR program in action. The Rio Grande cutthroat trout, New Mexico's official state fish, lives in wild and beautiful places, and New Mexico Department of Game and Fish biologists are at the vanguard conserving this native fish that is important to the economy and ecology and the citizenry.
Well, the Rio Grande cutthroat trout is the state fish of New Mexico. It's native to northern New Mexico and some of southern Colorado. It's a very beautiful fish, and it's a fish that anglers like to catch up in the high mountain streams.
Rio Grande cutthroat trout populations suffered significant challenges over decades and has become a conservation priority for the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish.
The fish was reduced to about 11% of its historic range. So it was on a negative trend for 50, 60 years. And over the last, I'd say 20 years or so, we're really seeing a bump up in the distribution of cutthroat trout. I work with the hatchery here at Seven Springs Hatchery, New Mexico Department of Game and Fish Hatchery, very closely, especially in the spring. Every spring we bring new genetic material, we bring new eggs from the wild. We spawn fish way out in the mountains and bring those eggs back to the hatchery where they can raise them up. And the other way I interact with the hatchery is when we do restoration projects and we need new fish to start a new population of cutthroat trout, we come to the hatchery here and we get small fish to start stocking these new streams to have new populations of Rio Grande cutthroat trout on the landscape. So the source of the funding for the projects that I work on and for the hatchery come from sport fish restoration funding, which is derived from an excise tax on fishing equipment, and additional funding comes from the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish from the sale of a fishing license. So really the projects that I work on for the conservation of native cutthroat trout are entirely funded by sport fish angler dollars.
Seven Springs Hatchery, operated by the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, was renovated in 2001 with funding from the WSFR program, which continues to fund its operation and maintenance. The hatchery is devoted to Rio Grande cutthroat trout, raising 4 strains of fish which are stocked in cold mountain streams where habitats have been renovated.
So the work that's been done on the ground here by New Mexico Department of Game and Fish through both the work that I do out in the field and at Seven Springs Hatchery, the funding that comes from sport fish restoration funding and from license sales, that's been a major factor in preventing the listing of Rio Grande cutthroat trout under the Endangered Species Act.
The Rio Castillo project in northern New Mexico has been a major success in cutthroat trout conservation. Strong partnerships and sport fish restoration funding fuel that success.
The conservation work for Rio Grande cutthroat trout has been very successful, and the recent decision for the species to not be listed under the Endangered Species Act is really the proof that what we've been doing has been really effective. We're having an upward trend in this species. We're getting it on the landscape, and more anglers are having that opportunity to go out there and walk in some beautiful country in New Mexico and have their shot at catching a really unique fish. The opportunities for angling that we try to kind of cultivate through the projects that I work on and other folks in New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, those directly benefit anglers because they can go out and they can fish for these very unique and strikingly beautiful fish in several places across New Mexico, whether they're willing to walk just a few feet, or if they want to hike 8 miles up into the wilderness, there's opportunities for these anglers to catch this very special fish.
Since first enacted into law by Congress in 1937, the Whisper programs have sent over $18.6 billion to state agencies to conserve fish and wildlife. Hunters and anglers foot the bill, but everyone reaps the benefits of conservation.